This shows you as heavy as I was.
How light are you?
About 280.
18+% of our children right now are obese.
If you go with the flow in America today, you will end up overweight or obese, as 2/3 of Americans do.
I don't want to be fat for the rest of my life. I've got diabetes,
Sleep apnea.
high blood pressure.
I get dizzy when I get up.
Everything's hurting now.
If we don't now take this as a really serious, urgent national priority, we are, all of us individually and as a nation, going to pay a really serious price.
A lot of research is pointing towards the early period of life as critical to obesity and diabetes. And so this tells us that if we really want to deal with these health problems, it's not enough to start with adults. We're going to have to go back and figure out what do we do to support the health of mothers and the health of babies during their prenatal period and young children. Because it seems like maybe this train has already left the station to some extent when you're an adult. And that if we really want to make a difference, we're going to have to look to that early period to make some interventions.
We've shown that obesity rates have gone up even in infants from the 1980s to the early 21st century. Then we know that prevention really has to start very early, sometimes even before birth.
The impact actually begins before conception. It starts with the preconception health of a woman before she becomes pregnant.
One very good indication of a child who is at risk is a child who has a parent who is overweight or obese themselves, and we don't tend to identify patients at risk that way, but I think we should.
The weight that a woman enters a pregnancy is one of the strongest predictors of whether she will develop gestational diabetes.
And we know that women with gestational diabetes, so this is diabetes first recognized in pregnancy, have children who are at higher risk of obesity and of diabetes.
We love the swing. Ready? Ready?
Before I got pregnant, I had no idea that weight could impact my pregnancy. I thought I was healthy when I got pregnant. I was shocked that I was, before my child was born, putting him behind the 8 ball.
Hey, where's Dada? Say hi. Being overweight coming into a pregnancy can actually have lots of metabolic implications for the mother. Gestational diabetes is any abnormality in your blood sugar that is first noticed when you're pregnant.
Maternal overweight and obesity itself is a risk factor for being large for gestational age, even before birth.
The higher the body mass index of a woman coming into pregnancy, the more likely her child is going to be one that has a higher body mass index. So an obese woman coming into pregnancy is more likely to have an obese child. That's for 3 potential reasons. One is obese women give their genes to their kids. And we know that there's some genes that are related to the risk of obesity. The second reason is that kids grow up in the same environment as their moms. So an obese mom may eat more fast food, may drink more sugary beverages, will be a role model and a giver of these poor habits to the child. But the third reason, and the one that we're most interested in studying in our research, is what happens in the pregnancy. So what is the environment of the fetus that's responding to the mother's cues, and how does that give rise to these long-term risks?
Our little
visits. Here's Jake. Look
That's
at this.
Jake.
Yes.
Hi, Jake. Yeah. When did you find out that you had gestational diabetes?
I could have been 24 weeks.
And was it just a routine test that your
Yes.
obstetric
I went for my
provider did?
routine glucose test. My numbers were off the charts. They automatically sent me right to a doctor.
Her pre-pregnancy weight was heavier than was ideal, and that was likely the reason for her gestational diabetes. She did not have a strong family history.
I felt that I looked good and was healthy because I was working out a lot and eating okay. According to the medical charts, I in fact, was not healthy. I probably should have had a little less weight before I got pregnant, but I didn't realize that.
As a society, we tend to be getting a little heavier, and so our ideal of what may be normal may be so socially, but in terms of the health of our body, it may not be. So for you coming into pregnancy, you know, had you been sort of closer to the 140 to 150, the weights that I had pre-pregnancy, you were sort of 170, 180.
Yeah.
One of the most important things we're learning is that if women are able to come into pregnancy close to their ideal weight, it really cuts down on the risk of gestational diabetes.
Whatever women can do to really tackle their weight before they get pregnant and really give thought to it and plan that. And the providers who take care of women as well, the better we'll all be.
Another thing we didn't discuss is how much weight you gain during pregnancy.
Well, first of all, you're pregnant and you think, okay, this is the time, you know, you can
Oh,
eat
you
your
can eat for
ice
two,
cream.
right?
Exactly, exactly.
You know what I think
now
the
you're on a
advice ought to
diet.
be? I've never tested this out, but I think it should be you're eating for 1.1
Right,
instead
no, I
of
know.
eating for 2.
I will call it about a 30-pound weight gain. I just looked at it like I might as well enjoy myself. I'm going to get bigger anyways, which was not the way to think. You're not really eating for two. They tell you to just eat as you would eat for yourself and just eat healthy, not extra.
The thinner you are coming into pregnancy, the more weight you could and should gain.
Right.
The heavier you are coming into pregnancy, the less weight you should gain.
The dangers of gestational diabetes in the short term for the mother, again, vary depending on the degree of how high their blood sugars are. For most women with gestational diabetes, that degree of abnormality is relatively mild, and most women will be able to manage it with diet and exercise changes.
Dr. Eggleston wanted me to exercise by way of walking at least 20 minutes a day.
The main goal is to help them lower their blood sugars by eating foods that are more complex carbohydrate, more vegetables, more proteins.
Carbs had to be limited to under a certain amount at each feeding, say under 20 grams, if I remember correctly. Lunch was always easy because it was just a salad. That's all I'm used to eating anyways, with some protein on it. And then dinner was the vegetables and a meat, protein or fish, and you just have to cut out the carbs by way of which is usually, you know, potatoes or rice that people would have at dinner.
Unfortunately, that didn't keep her from needing some insulin.
You're supposed to check your blood levels 3 times a day, and one of them is when you wake up in the morning. Those numbers were continually always high. Again, I'm not eating during the night. It couldn't be controlled by diet. It was obviously something my body was doing, so I had to go on insulin. I ended up doing shots nightly until the baby was born, on top of the diet. My husband has been wonderful. During the pregnancy, he was there every step of the way, going to doctor's appointments.
As far as what I could do is just be supportive with the diet, and that's it.
He ate what I ate. He did not eat the rice. He did not eat potatoes.
I did a lot of the cooking. Yeah, a lot of chicken.
Yeah.
a lot of vegetables.
I actually felt bad. I told him, go ahead, you can have it, it doesn't matter, but he didn't. So that was a lot of help, because when you sit there and watch somebody eating something you would love to eat, makes it a little worse. So that was a huge help, I think, for me to stick with it.
It was really under her control. I gave her some insulin shots.
He did give me my shots.
Yeah, it's one of my duties.
Yep.
It couldn't have been easy. It wasn't easy for me. Eating the chicken you know, I mean, she was real good about following the doctor's advice, the nutritionist's advice. She did good.
Jake weighed 7 pounds and 10 ounces when he was born, perfect size.
Carrie ultimately had a baby with a normal weight, no hypoglycemia, and she did not develop any high blood pressure, and that was exactly what we could have hoped for.
Want to put one in? Ready? Put one in there. Yeah, good boy.
And gestational diabetes also has long-term implications for mother and for babies. So follow-up is very important for women with gestational diabetes.
They need to be watched for the development of type 2 diabetes. They need to be counseled about their weight status, and especially if they're going to have another baby, to come into the next pregnancy leaner.
We recommend a postpartum oral glucose tolerance test in all women at 6 to 12 weeks. Thank you for getting your postpartum oral glucose tolerance test done. And I have the results, and like we thought, they were not quite normal. Wasn't at the level of type 2 diabetes, but it let us know that you're at risk of type 2 diabetes. So it was in the range of something we call pre-diabetes, or at risk for diabetes. We just need to work really hard on the diet and exercise.
Okay.
If you can do that, there's a really good chance that we can prevent diabetes in the long run, because the most effective thing is the diet and exercise. And then we just need to be checked once a year to make sure that things aren't progressing.
I am at a greater risk of developing type 2 diabetes. If I don't exercise and eat right, there's a high chance that I will develop that later on in life. I have not been able to get back to my pre-pregnancy weight. Ready for night-night? Ready? Take that monkey. Take that monkey. I especially find it extremely difficult now with a baby to get out there and do what I know I need to do for myself. Fitting it in is the problem sometimes when you're so tired at the end of the day. So I've started to incorporate him with me exercising, going for walks. Best I can do is fit it in when I can. If I have a bad day, I have a bad day. The next day might be better. It's definitely a battle that I'm gonna continue to fight, because I know that not only for myself is it worth it, but it's worth it for my child too. I don't want to be an overweight mother. I want to be healthy, fun, active. I want to be able to run around and do things with him. I always say I think we both would like to have a sibling for him, yes.
It's a lot of work, but it's worth it.
Yeah. I do truthfully go back and forth about having another child, because I am nervous about developing gestational diabetes again. Is it necessarily a fact that you would, with another pregnancy, get gestational diabetes?
Well, if you have gestational diabetes in this pregnancy, you're more likely to have it in the next pregnancy.
Okay.
But you can reduce that risk by going into it with a better weight status.
You don't have to get back to, an ideal weight.
Right.
Even just losing 7%, of your body weight, or 7 to 10 pounds could really, really make a difference.
Okay.
Any small bit of weight loss really makes a big difference. So do what you can to lose some weight. It could be 7 to 10 pounds. It could be more than that.
Concentrate on your own diet and activity now. You'll come into the next pregnancy at a better state. And so your next baby will have better results too.
Excellent.
How's he doing? He looks great.
He's doing really well. We just had a pediatrician appointment the other day, and his weight was 17 pounds, and the doctor had told me that he was healthy. She said for his height, his weight was completely appropriate. He's actually 27 inches.
Matching each other.
That was good news.
Yeah.
Because, you know, after you hear you have gestational diabetes, I read that, you know, your children could be at risk for diabetes or obesity.
A kid at a certain percentile, say the 90th percentile, has a BMI that's higher than 90% of the kids of his age and sex ought to be. From 85th to 95th percentile is called overweight, and above the 95th percentile is called obese.
There's this general sense that children are going to grow out of their baby fat, which I think it doesn't always happen. And actually, most of the evidence shows that most children do not grow out of the baby fat that they put on very young.
The faster a baby gains weight, even in the first weeks to months of life, the more likely he or she is to be overweight or obese later. At 3 years, at 5 years, even at 17 years.
Accelerated weight gain in those first 6 months of life is associated with greater risk of obesity, greater risk of hypertension, greater risk of asthma-like symptoms and recurrent wheezing.
Kids who are born to women who had gestational diabetes are at somewhat higher risk of developing excess weight as they grow up, especially through school age. Not every woman who has gestational diabetes has a baby or a child with a weight problem. It's just a higher risk.
Okay.
So we don't, you know, it's not like everything is determined and there's nothing you can do about it. We're really interested in what families can do when they're this age to prevent those long-term consequences. These early life factors, the way I look at it, set trajectories. So if you set a healthy trajectory early in life, it's a lot easier to stay in that kind of lane. If you set a less healthy trajectory early in life, it's really hard to change lanes.
By the age of 2, we're seeing children who had been exposed to pretty significant risk factors during their mother's pregnancy and a whole host of risk factors from infancy all through early childhood. Introduced to solids early, not being breastfed, too much juice or sugar-sweetened beverages, fast food more than once a week, watching way too much TV, not sleeping enough.
It is particularly important in the earliest months, weeks and months of life, and certainly years, that children establish good patterns of healthy diet, regular, healthful foods, while those biological systems are being kind of laid down early on.
When we think about feeding, breastfeeding is best.
There's strong evidence to suggest that breastfeeding imparts a protective effect on weight gain in children.
Since breastfeeding is really important for other outcomes, like allergies, like gastrointestinal illness, probably cognition, that it doesn't hurt to say, well, it may be reducing the risk of obesity later on.
An infant who is breastfed, who is full, comes off the breast. And that learned self-regulation, that learned behavior of a child being able to come off the breast when they are full, I think has long-lasting effects on a child's ability to regulate how much he or she eats. It's very common and probably a natural response to respond to an infant who is crying by feeding them, giving them a bottle, or putting them to feed on a mother's breast. And I would say that it's probably wrong on our behalf on families' behalf to think that all crying equals hunger.
For children whose cries may be hunger cries, but other times the cries may be just, I want attention, or I'm bored, or I'm uncomfortable. If the people who are caring for children, whether it be their parents or caregivers who are not family members, are not reading those signals appropriately, and every time a child cries, you kind of feed the child. So that sets up behavior patterns of an expectation that when you're hungry, you're fed. When you're uncomfortable, you're fed. When you're kind of looking for stimulation. Instead of getting it, you're fed. So that establishes patterns of eating.
And it's that whole sense of being able to pick up more on a baby who's hungry and a baby who's full, and not always resorting to the bottle to make a child stop crying.
There's been this theory out there that the introduction of solid foods too early may predispose somebody to get more obese later on. And what we found in our study is that among the formula feeders, but not the breastfeeders, that introducing solid foods before the age of 4 months, compared to introducing it between 4 to 6 months, raised the risk of obesity 3 years later quite a bit. Actually, in our study, it was something like 4 times the risk.
So this sense of introducing solids too early and not breastfeeding is associated with a pretty significant risk of obesity early in life. My top recommendation, number 1, would be to eliminate sugar-sweetened beverages, eliminate all sugary beverages.
Fruit juices can be a problem, and in fact, in childcare, we encourage the elimination or great reduction of consumption of fruit juice.
Juice can have almost exactly the same sugar content as a glass of soda.
What do you like better, chicken or peas?
He likes the peas.
He does. I knew when we had Jake that I would instill good eating habits in him right from the start. I have not introduced any form of sweets or things like that to him yet. It has been all vegetables, protein, fruit.
In infancy, depending upon what they're fed and how they're fed and how often they're fed, children begin to develop early food preferences. They begin to associate eating as a kind of pleasurable act as part of a social interaction. And what is happening on a biological level is that's helping the body to establish regular rhythms that make for good physiological adaptation. But it's also establishing early behavior patterns.
Whatever is in my control, I am going to try to control it, but it is hard when there are other people involved who think it's just fun to feed a baby or a kid.
Oh, can I give him a bite of this? Can I give him a bite of this? And we just say no, and then they say, why not? Oh, it's a baby, a cookie, ice cream, cake.
A lot of my friends say, oh, geez, why hasn't he having a cookie or anything yet? Well, because I had diabetes, and I know that he's at risk. I don't think a lot of people understand.
Yeah.
And I don't think I would have understood if this didn't happen to me.
Right. Loves his peas,
Well, he
loves his cantaloupe.
He definitely loves fruit. When he's a little bit older, I will also try to enforce those habits.
High levels of inactivity is what can lead to weight gain early in childhood. And it's also setting a pattern. If you're an inactive child, you're likely to grow up and be an inactive adult. And we know that inactivity on its own is an independent risk factor for many chronic diseases, regardless of whether you gain weight as a result of the inactivity. So there are many reasons to get children up and moving.
A child is going to be much more likely to be active if their parent is active, if their parent takes them out for a walk, if their parent supports their physical activity and participates in physical activity with them.
When he gets older and he can move around a little bit better, it'll be exercise. Not a lot of downtime with computers and sitting and watching TV, but getting out and exercising.
Hey, good boy. Here you go.
We found that the worst combination for obesity risk, so children who were at highest risk of obesity, were children who were watching too much TV in combination with not sleeping enough.
The American Academy of Pediatrics recommends really no screen time before the age of 2 and limiting screen time to 2 or fewer hours after the age of 2. Boy, that's hard today, isn't it? Because we've got TVs, we've got DVDs and videos that are seen on TVs, we've got DVDs and videos and TV shows that are seen on computers, we've got big screens, we've got small screens, iPads, iPods, and everything in between.
One of the reasons why television viewing and TVs in bedrooms might be related to weight gain in children could be because it's displacing sleep. And sleep is now emerging as its own independent risk factor for obesity.
There have been several studies that have shown a relationship between sleeping problems in early childhood and later obesity.
Infants who typically sleep less than 12 hours a night had twice the risk of obesity 3 years later as those who slept greater than 12 hours a night. There have been studies later in childhood and adulthood that suggest that poor sleep, so sleeping fewer hours at night, is related to changes in hormones that increase appetite that lead to weight gain. If you put your baby to bed not completely asleep, but rocked, say, gently until the baby is half asleep, if you don't put your baby to bed with a bottle, if you put your baby to bed with less stimulation, like the TV is off, they get more sleep.
The task for every parent is to get to learn and know what's unique about his or her child. And that gets played out in the day-to-day routines of feeding and putting to sleep and soothing and engaging and cooing and interacting with infants literally from the day they're born and through their infancy and their toddlerhood and on. And everyone understands instinctively what that is as kind of caregiving. But what's exciting about the science is that it's telling us what's going on under the skin and inside the body, that all of these things that we kind of instinctively do are part of a necessary biological pattern of helping to regularize physiological systems in the body. For children to develop day-night cycles for sleeping, to develop good eating habits on a regular feeding schedule with the right introduction at the right time of the right kinds of foods.
Go for a walk. Want to go to the park? If I got pregnant again, I would prepare from the start. Eat right, healthy, and go for walks. The advice that I would give is absolutely lose a little bit of weight before you want to get pregnant. And don't use it as an excuse to say, hey, I'm pregnant, let me have some ice cream. It could affect your child.
I would tell women who are overweight or obese and planning to have children that the most important thing they can do is before they become pregnant to do whatever they can to have a healthy lifestyle. Eating more fresh fruits and vegetables and proteins and lower processed foods, cutting out the sodas and the white flour. The more they can do to be physically active, the better it will be. Get yourself moving and get yourself eating in a healthy way that works for your lifestyle. Whether or not they get pregnant, that's important for them in the long term.